committee, and I'm just wanting to start with a couple of housekeeping matters as we work through this afternoon. Councillor Hopkins, you asked this morning, would we be able to revisit some previous chapters?
Yeah.
What I'm going to suggest to make it easier for staff to cope with and deal with, are you prepared to email those to me and so that we can prepare them for the meeting of the 18th? Otherwise, we're diving backwards and forwards through chapters. And
look, I'm more than happy to do that. The question, I would like to discuss the sites and areas of significance to Maori, perhaps in relation to the mapping. So since we haven't discussed that yet, it may be possible to actually canvass some of the things I want to talk about in that context, if you are willing to allow that. I did have two questions to officers that I would imagine they may be able to ask now. If I can ask them now, and if you want to.
No. What we're trying to do is manage so that we can deal with it on the 18th, if that's okay. Thank you very much. Now I'm just going to ask the governance advisor to tidy up some apologies and that from this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, just an update that will need to be made to the minutes to show that Councillor Tim Blackler arrived at the meeting at 9:35 and was present for the remainder of the morning session, rather than being an apology for the full morning session, which was resolved at the beginning of the meeting. So I ask for your ruling to accept that change in the minutes, Mr. Chair.
Yes, with the condition that it is also, that the minutes also record that he not only attended, but made a valuable contribution.
If I may get your ruling, Mr. Chair, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
I will rule accordingly.
Okay, thank you. And then I believe Councillor Tim Blackler wishes to make a declaration.
Thank you. In relation to public excluded item 5.1, additional information updated outstanding natural landscapes mapping and to planning map 7 contained in the related information for the 18th December agenda. I will be recusing myself from being involved in the discussion and also the vote on that matter to manage a claim of perceived bias. Also, I need to declare a conflict of interest in any conversation relating to map 41, and I will leave the room for any conversation relating to this map.
Thank you, councillor.
Yeah,
Perhaps the minutes should also note that Mayor Kirchhoff's an apology either for the afternoon or for lateness.
No, the mayor, this morning the mayor tabled an apology for this afternoon session. He had another meeting to attend. So we're moving along and reconvening on page 716 of the agenda, which is the schedule of significant natural features. Now we can possibly have a discussion around any specific questions in this, but bearing in mind that staff have asked to resubmit this on the 18th, when it will be in a fully tabled and numbered form. But it seems we're working through it. Have I misread that, Mr. Campbell? Or?
Just a slight change suggested there may be that subject to the discussion on the schedule, that it come to council as a numbered schedule, because the numbers are just a administrative thing. It doesn't change the intent of the table. It's just an administrative factor. So that could be a thing we bring to the council for as part of the plan itself, and the discussion can still take place on the content, subject to the numbering being tidied up as a administrative thing rather than needing another committee discussion on just numbering.
Right. Madam Chair, is it you?
Yes, I do believe that we've got, the reason that we're bringing the schedule 9 back to an 18 March meeting is because schedule 8 was published twice. So schedule 9, is that correct? Has not been published, which means it needs to be in another agenda for another meeting.
It's probably schedule 7 and 8 that were duplicated. So schedule 9 doesn't relate to those two. So there'll be an additional new schedule. This one stands on its own.
Okay, can we please have clarification? What are we bringing to the 18th of March meeting that has not been published?
Point of order. Can I just clarify? I've got in front of me, I've gone back to the material supplied to us for our 18th of December committee meeting. And I'm looking at page 716, District Plan Review Subcommittee, Schedule 9, Schedule of Significant Natural Features. And if it was in my agenda, it would have been in the public agenda. So it has been published.
Yes, yeah, what we're trying to ascertain is the chapter that hasn't been,
Yes.
that was discussed earlier on today.
Yeah, that's correct. So we are missing a schedule called Schedule of Outstanding Natural Features, which would have been either Schedule 7 or 8, but 7 and 8 are duplicates for outstanding natural landscapes. So we've avoided Schedule 7 because it was a duplicate of Schedule 8, and that a new schedule would come to the 18th of March
Right.
called whatever number it is, Schedule of the Outstanding Natural Features. Schedule 9 we can carry on.
All right. So we
There
all
was much.
now totally clear that we are going to work our way through Schedule 9, heading towards Schedule 10, hopefully. So we start with SNF XX, and all of the accompanying ones.
Mr. Chair, I confess that beyond asking the question that I asked earlier about whether any or all of these had received owners' consent, and the information that we were given this morning was that owners had been consulted. Now, that is subtly different from actually having written consent that the SNF be included. But I could test the mood of the meeting by moving that all significant natural features currently included in the draft district plan that have not been viewed and approved by the landowners involved be removed from the schedule. And if there's a seconder, I'll speak to it.
Is there a member of the subcommittee willing to second that motion?
Speaking very briefly, it's exactly what I moved with Heritage Buildings.
No, we're currently seeking a seconder. Councillor Percival, you're not pointing the finger at me, you're telling me you're seconding it. All right, thank you. Right, we now have a motion in front of us. Is there any elected members that have views to express on that? Councillor Blacklow?
Am I allowed to ask a question, Mr. Chair? or-
Yes, certainly.
I just want to understand that. I understand totally, Councillor Hopkins, what's trying to be achieved here, which is equity between urban and rural counterparts in principle. But I just want to understand what the implications are for our adherence to the national policy statement. If I would imagine it's a direct breach of that, is it?
There's no national policy statement on landscapes at the moment. There was signals that there might be one in the national planning framework, but that's probably disappeared now. So it's really an RMA obligation to identify these things and how we manage them in terms of rules, provisions, which we've already recommended to council. So that rule framework's already in the documents that have been through the committee. There's been a lot of work to work around these features. Some have disappeared, some have gone from outstanding to significant. So this is where we've landed. And again, it would be subject to submissions if it's notified. So to go through the exercise now would be a huge amount of work, really.
Is there anyone else want to express an opinion before we test the motion?
Supplementary, I guess I would like to just understand further what level of consultation has happened. Like what has been the threshold for us to deem that sufficient consultation has occurred?
So there's been effectively 2 rounds of consultation. So in 2021, the maps were sent out to the landowners with these and other features. As a result of that, there was quite a lot of change that went into the draft plan in 2022. And that again was consulted on over 3 months and had feedback. Where landowners requested site visits and looking at these, they've all happened and maps were sent out late last year. As well as that, there was an agreed peer review through the Rural Reference Group to have an outside second opinion on the landscape mapping, which resulted in further refinement as well. So it's a mix of that peer review, landowner visits, and this is kind of where we've landed. So it's been a 2-phase project in terms of that first wave of consultation, some changes, and the second wave, a more direct look at them and landed on where we've got to now.
So for people that have either missed the memo or chosen not to engage, what has been the approach to them? And also of the people that have actively engaged with us, are they resolved or are there still dissenting views from people?
Yeah, I guess for both groups you've talked about, there's probably people that still don't like having any classification on the land, whether it's a feature or a SASM or a hazard layer even. So it comes down to meeting the RMA obligations versus if we miss things out, what might come back later on through submissions or appeals to the plan if we don't put them on. Just kind of getting that balance. But as we mentioned and talked about this morning, the hierarchy of rules is kind of trying to reflect the higher level outstanding features and landscapes and a lower threshold for these, so it's not quite as onerous. And then there's still the rural scenic rules as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, could I just request that it gets read out again so I can...
The motion gets...
That all significant natural features currently included in the draft district plan that have not been viewed and approved by the landowners involved be removed from the schedule. Currently moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Percival.
Councillor Percival and Councillor Hopkins.
Chair, I have a question on inquiry. What's the relevance to what was
Microphone.
I have a question which is maybe not quite relevant, but I believe it is. So many submissions that came forward in regard to across the board indicate on different zoning were, to me, very sensible, practical and applicable to that either farming place or whatever business it was. It appeared to me that the stock standard answer to one that was going to create some thinking, the stock standard answer was does not comply with the NPS. But there was never an explanation of what part of the national policy statement that it was applicable to not take any regard of that submission. And that's my question. Why were the people who took the time to make the submissions given an answer which would have at least appeased their questioning and their topic?
So the feedback was all published on our website, and part of the process was providing the feedback to the committee, and this is the decision-making time now on that feedback essentially. So once the decision is made, it comes out in the proposed plan. That is the outcome of the consideration. So it's feedback, it's not a formal submission. So there's no loop back to them to say, here's on the 3,000 submission points, here's all the responses to those. That's what falls out of that in terms of the provisions. Because it's an informal process, we're doing it to tidy up the draft plan, and the proposed plan will be where it lands with all that feedback considered. But that information can be provided to people if they say, well, what happened to my feedback?
I don't know if that answer, that reply satisfied me in any which way at all. Submission process is one where people put forward their concerns and the effect it's having on their livelihood of their properties. You're telling me that this is immaterial until it becomes a classic proposed document, which then increases the cost and expense and the whole formalities of an environmental court for that person to actually find out what the hell was wrong with the submission. I'm sorry, it doesn't work for me. Maybe it's just a little bit simple.
Let's just keep our emotions in control here and deal with the issues. But do you want to respond, Mr. Campbell, or you don't have to?
Well, it's a process council agreed that they wanted to go out on a draft and get feedback on, so it could help refine the draft. There was no other process put in there or directed by council to say, let's have hearings, let's do this, do that with the feedback. The feedback's helped and inform where we've got to now, and working through the chapters and have made tweaks along the way. So, yeah, the proposed plan will be the version with feedback incorporated or not, depending on what it was.
Mr. Chair, I sort of moved this not entirely on a whim, but I was trying to move things along, and I don't want, by way of simplification of process at this point, to actually impose unnecessary complexity on officers. I'm just wondering if the resolution was amended with the consent of the seconder, so that it said something like that the schedule of significant natural features currently included in the draft district plan be reviewed with a view to removing or the view to considering the removal of SNFs for which the approval or the consent of the relevant landowner has not been received. I would think that if it was amended in that respect, it would save officers some time. The other thing that I actually believe is practically and statutorily possible, I believe if we did do so, if we moved either resolution, the review could come back to the notified plan as a staff submission, because you've acknowledged there's going to be staff submissions anyway. So I would not be of a mind to say that it has to be done and dusted before council signs off the plan. I believe that as long as the resolution's there and is embedded in whatever decision is made by council, that would be legitimate because the staff submission will be published and will be open to cross submission. So if the seconder is willing to accept that amendment, I would change that with a view to trying to be helpful and not impose undue short-term demands on the planning team.
Mr. Campbell, I'll just ask you to respond because there's no point going through the exercise if we're going to get the same answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess we have to be mindful of timing and I guess judicial process, in that if that exercise is underway when the plan's notified, it puts us in a sticky legal ground in that people will be submitting on it, and then we are also asking them to give approval, so that would be problematic. I guess take a step back too, and when all of this was working through, there was no kind of standard RMA practice, but there's no kind of obligation to seek approval for any of these matters, and there was no direction from council to whether it's these or heritage items or whatever. So we proceed on the basis of consultation, feedback, working through changes, working with landowners and the experts to kind of land on where we think it can end up. Obviously, there's still a proposed plan and submission process and appeals. So I guess at this late point to suddenly say, oh, hang on, we want to do the certain things in a different way in terms of how they get into the plan, that's sort of quite a shift in our approach from what we've done the last few years. And then, as I said at the start, we can't really overlap that with the submission process of the plan. So I guess we have to be careful with starting to sort of like pick and choose some of these topics and change our entire approach. We've gone out and consulted, worked through the feedback, met with landowners, that type of thing. Whether it's this or heritage items, and now it's kind of saying, well, hang on, we're actually seeking explicit approval or consent is quite a different kettle of fish. And we'd have to put a time frame on that. So you'd have an endpoint. So it would create quite a lot of work, and yeah, it would be a sort of an odd situation of picking and choosing, depending on landowner agreement, which ones would be in or not, regardless of their criteria. So it's a wee bit problematic, but.
Councillor Percival.
Yeah, I'd like to back the truck up a bit too. Over the last couple of years, you blokes have done a lot of work. You've done a lot of visits. You've been all over the place. I've come in here quite often with those and seen and heard suggestions of change on properties that made a lot of sense, and a lot of nodding and agreement to that. But I don't believe a lot of that was occurred in the field and in discussion and in workshops actually took place, because the only way you can prove that to me is to show me how many changes have been made through that process. Because I don't believe a lot of the information brought forward by the people, by the farmers, by the landholders, has actually been incorporated in a change in the proposed plan. And I don't believe you can go forward and be notified with all that missing, because it's just the cost of everything and the damage it's doing. I really don't think a lot of people around this table understand the effects on the rural community and the financial aspects of it. And I know you have to adhere to policy statements of goodness knows what and all the ecology stuff and the whatever. But by crikey, I'm not comfortable with this at all. And hence backing the truck up as you just did.
Councillor Blackler, then Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, look, I'd just like to express that on the balance, I think I would be voting against the motion, just on the basis that the significant natural features they're more tangible matters as opposed to the matter we discussed this morning around outstanding natural landscapes. But that's not to detract from the fact I completely understand that the principle that Councillor Hopkins trying to, and Councillor Percival trying to put forward here. But that's not to say I also don't have some reservations and concerns and questions about the extent of the geometry files, if you like, that sit over those said sites. But as far as the principle of the significant natural feature, I think it's a slightly different contextual argument to the outstanding natural landscape.
Councillor Hopkins. Look, yeah. I would make a couple of general points. I think with regard to this plan and indeed planning generally and other plans nationwide, in my experience and sort of third-party observation, expert opinion has always prevailed over lay view. And there is a sort of a body of opinion within, shall we say, the planning industry that actually gives preference to particular ideas and particular perceptions, and a particular, in my view, distorted emphasis, as I cited earlier, the focus on landscapes being only a rural issue and not an urban one, which is where most people encounter landscapes or townscapes and where most people live. Putting that aside, it's also true that, yes, there's been a long process, but in a lot of these cases, much of what is in front of us now, we hadn't seen until the 18th of December last year. So it may have taken a long time, but we haven't necessarily had a chance to study in detail a lot of the stuff until quite late in the piece. Equally, I know that the council and individual councillors have repeatedly expressed concern about people imposing Category 1 status or including heritage buildings in the list in the district plan without owner's consent. And although Heather Backup's resolution did allow that to happen in cases where the property in question was absolutely significant, the council rolled back on that and put a much greater emphasis on individual consent. I don't want to impose undue obligations or additional obligations on the planning staff. I'm happy to amend the resolution, as I indicated earlier, if the seconder will agree, otherwise I'll let it lapse. And the amended resolution was that the schedule of significant natural features included in the draft district plan be reviewed with a view to considering the removal of specific SNFs if the approval for their inclusion in the schedule has not been received from the relevant landowner. Now, if Guy is willing to second that, I'd like to have put.
I'll second that.
Then I'd like to see it put, Mr. Chair.
Just a point on that, Mr. Chair, that's not quite the wording that was said last time. That's close.
I accept that, Madam GA. But could we have that version that I've just given you as the resolution, please?
Mr. Campbell.
I've just dug out some figures to help inform some of the discussion. So in the draft plan that went out in 2022, there was just under 6,500 hectares shown as significant natural features. As a result of the feedback, that is now just under 2,950 hectares. So I think that's quite a substantial reduction. Likewise, the outstanding natural features, which we're not talking about today, but that's dropped from just under 15,000 hectares to just over 11,000 hectares. So I think that represents a reasonable degree of change as a result of, under visits and further work. So unless you compare the maps, which is sometimes difficult at scale, you won't see the changes directly, but what's on the maps in the agenda reflects that, those latter figures that have dropped. And just as an aside, the current district plan significant natural features is 2,666 hectares, so it's not a lot less than what we're proposing. 2,666 as opposed to 2,947 in the proposed. So a lot of the SNFs are already there. Some have been reshaped and there might be the odd new one. That's probably the key change from the proposed to the operative.
I certainly in terms of knowledge of our own patch, I've read through, what's in, Waihemo, and I don't see anything that is outside what has been there in the past. And it's quite acceptable. Madam GA, would you just please note that the mayor has,
I have no, so
thank you.
again, Mr. Chair, I'll ask you to rule that we will change the minutes to show that the mayor is now in the meeting and is likely to be here for the rest of the session. Is that correct, Mr. Mayor? Because at the moment, we have an apology for you for the afternoon, so I will amend the minutes with your ruling, Mr. Chair.
I will rule accordingly, Madam.
Okay.
Roger.
Just to clarify with Mr. Campbell that the number of the SNFs are geosites. And this is the only protection they have as geosites, is that correct?
Mr. Chair,
Hang on,
sorry.
we'll get an answer first.
Yeah, they'll fall under different classifications, so some will be significant natural features. Just to clarify, those numbers provided with the land that's freehold in the district, so it doesn't include all the dock or other public land. But it's the ones that affect freehold land.
No, Councillor Hopkins. Oh,
When you say freehold, does that include pastoral lease?
That pastoral lease is Crown land that's leased, so it won't include it.
So what's the number including pastoral lease?
No, I don't have that number at hand.
right, Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I do thank Mr. Campbell for the actual indication of the change in the hectareage involved. And on the basis of that information, which I didn't have in front of me, and I apologise, perhaps I should have remembered it from 2 years ago, 3 decades back, and having consulted with the seconder, I would ask your permission to withdraw the motion.
Thank you, councillor. I will grant the permission. I'd just like to make an observation, particularly for staff. Whilst there's questioning and of decisions and seeking explanations as to the rationale that's got us to these points, please do not think that it is personal criticism of your own performance. Sitting here, I'm seeing some body language that's telling me that you're feeling slightly less enamoured with some of the questioning than the spirit in which it is meant. As elected members, we're charged with the responsibility of seeking questions to some things that may require political solutions. It is not in any way to be construed as an attack on the considerable work that you've put into the plan so far. So with the withdrawal of that motion, I think that I'd be looking for someone to move that we accept Schedule 10. Schedule 9 and move on to Schedule 10. Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Councillor Blackler, all those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. Yes, yes. So we move into Schedule 10, the schedule of rural scenic landscapes. Councillor Hopkins.
If I may ask, look, I'm probably asking this as a question for public information as much as anything. But the previous district plan did, I think, by way of an amendment, include a rural scenic zone. And I have a feeling that Mayor Kircher, when he was a councillor, perhaps deputy mayor, was one of the 3 commissioners who actually heard submissions regarding what is the current rural scenic zone. It might be fruitful if you can, I know you've discussed this, but can you just one more time go through the extent to which the rural scenic zone has changed? I know it's a bit bigger, I think, But it might be helpful to all, particularly those who are watching this. If you could just run through that again, please.
Thank you. Again, these figures are just freehold that I've got to hand, but we can certainly provide it for the other land. In the operative plan at the moment, the rural scenic zone is just under 140,000 hectares, noting that some will extend into Crown land beyond that, over and above that. In the draft plan that went out, that reduced to just over 105,000 hectares, but some of the ONL increased. So there's kind of a bit of a change like that. And as a result of the changes in the draft, it dropped again in the freehold only to just over 104,000 hectares. So a small change there, but less than in the current plan. But there's obviously a corresponding increase in the ONL areas. So, yeah, so it's
Thank you, David.
similar. Yeah.
Councillor Blackler.
Thank you. So would it be fair to say that as a result of the motion that was passed this morning around ONLs, that the rural scenic will be increased to kind of fill that void, or how do you see that working?
Yeah, it depends on the outcome of the analysis, but if areas of ONL dropped out, then it would default to rural scenic. So that would just go like that, really. Yeah, change, but not probably substantially.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to move the adoption of Schedule 10.
So we have moved Councillor Hopkins, seconded Councillor Blackler. Is there any discussion? So no one has any specific questions? Oh, sorry, Councillor McCann.
Dave, could you give us a rough idea, please, of the total hectareage from, I know you just said that might change, but just across the board of what we've been talking about today?
Again, these are only freehold land areas. So in the current version in front of you, outstanding natural landscapes, 95,747 hectares, outstanding 95,747. There might be some changes as a result of the mapping, but these were recent figures. The outstanding natural features, which we haven't covered today, is 11,146. A significant feature, natural features, which we just talked about, was 2,947. Rural scenic 104,261, it's 104,261. And there's significant natural areas 7,415. That would obviously drop with one dropping out from the resolution today. And the sites and areas of significance to Maori, 12,350. And a lot of those overlap with the features as well. Oh yeah, 12,350 for the SASMs, many of which overlap with the features as well.
Thank you.
No further discussion. I will put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. This has been a very protracted meeting that started on the 18th of December and has been adjourned 2 or 3 times since. And a very substantial body of minutes will have been accrued and accumulated. Could I perhaps request you to perhaps suggest to Mr. Cook that we may be given minutes, not necessarily in one giant batch, but perhaps in sort of 20-page modules to make it simply humane and relatively time effective to consider when going through them in the detail that we all apply.
I can assure councillor Hopkins that we are working through the logistics, because going back prior to the 18th of November, we have a considerable body of work to digest, and we could be somewhere in the vicinity of 60 plus pages of notes at this stage. So it is being dealt with as humanly possible.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, well, we're going to move on now to the additional information, which is the first agenda item for this meeting of the 7th of March. Sorry, Mr. Campbell, I was so excited that we were making progress, I didn't see you had your hand up.
Just an order thing in terms of where we've got to. So the February meeting had, so we're sort of going back a wee bit, but the February meeting had an additional item on the updated sites and areas of significance to Maori overlay mapping that we didn't cover off at that meeting because we were still working through the chapters and schedules. So I wonder if it'd be useful to start with that, so we wrap up that item and then move on to the one you just mentioned for today's meeting. So it's on the agenda for the 13th of February meeting, and additional item L2.
So we will need to go back to past meetings.
It's still part of this meeting sequence.
Yes, but it's not showing in the minutes that we have in front of us.
Yeah.
So we
Decide how you
don't,
want to deal with it.
if members go at the top of the page to past, and I'll find the DPR subcommittee meeting of the 13th of February.
Equally, Mr. Chairman, the benefit of members, if you've notated the 18th of December, then that would be, I've been using the 18th of December, my notes for that meeting all day. So however you've annotated 18 Dec or 13 December, February, you'll have the information. The page would be handy though, Mr. Chair.
So we're talking about the additional information, updated sites and areas of significance to the Maori overlay mapping that was authored by Katrina. Is that correct?
On what day? Is it the same? Okay. Would the December pack be the same or would it be different?
Probably would be different.
No, as I say, if you go back to the 13th of February.
If you go into convene on the 13th of February, there was a DPRSC meeting. What we're talking about here is agenda item L2, additional information, updated sites and areas of significance to Māori overlay mapping. The recommendation there is that the District Plan Review Subcommittee recommends that council accepts the attached updated sites and areas of significance to Māori overlay mapping shown on the maps as a solid white colour for notification in a proposed district plan.
So
Page 4 of those agenda papers.
correct. So what we're seeing in this mapping is an alteration of what was previously. So I presume this is a revision that's come to us from Okaha.
No, Mr. Chair, it's the page, Mr. Chair, page 4 shows that the amendments have been made following recommendations from Te Runanga Umureki.
Which would have been delivered to us by Okaha.
Possibly so, but Okaha the planning agency may not have agreed with the Runaka. But the map on page 5 shows the changes they are proposing to make.
Pages 5, 6, 7,
Yes.
8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Councillor Blackler, did you want to?
Well,
I just wanted to ascertain it. Is this a comprehensive package of all the areas that have associated questions or concerns, or are these just a series of matters that have been resolved?
Yeah, thank you, councillor Blackler. These are areas that were requested to be looked at. It is not all of the sites that we've had feedback on. It's the ones that they would look at and get done in time for this or that agenda for the 13th. They've indicated that through the proposed plan process, they will continue to engage and relook at sites as submissions come in on them. But just because of time and resource constraints, they've got these ones through to us, but it's by no means the whole district.
Yeah, so if I may ask some questions, I'm wondering if the officers can help us. These maps on pages 5 through 10 are relatively small, and they don't necessarily indicate, because the area that is now proposed to be included is shown as white, i.e. there's nothing by way of an underlay or indication. I'm still anxious to establish the extent to which the proposed reduced amount of area impacts on cultivated or privately owned land.
I think looking through the maps, a fair chunk of them, certainly part of the map on page 5 covers largely sort of the Ahuriri River flats, but some of which are cultivated, some aren't. But by and large, they sort of avoid a lot of cultivated areas, but some of it's farmed. The map on page 6 obviously has areas of cultivated land, some of which is wetlands, some of which is wetlands and amongst it, some of which is a rock art site, Tokiroa. And then the ones alongside the rivers, Waitaki River, etc., there are chunks of developed land there, and they've reduced the extent of it, so it still is over developed land. Likewise, Wainakarua. Ricky's a bit of a mix there. And then down the Pleasant River estuary, there's probably limits there in terms of what's been developed because of the estuary. And then obviously the last one is the Waitaki River margin, which is a mix of developed and less developed land. It is a mix, but by and large it's reduced in extent across most of those, or changed slightly in some.
Would it be fair to say that there's probably been a 50% reduction on that overlay down the Waitaki? And that map on page 12, it certainly looks to me as quite a removal there.
Yeah, the Waitaki River one, it's hard to pick up, but it is quite a change from the end of last year's agenda version versus what's on along the margins now. If you go up to, well, certainly page 8 shows it for the river mouth. South of the river mouth is a wedge comes out there at the end of Kaika Road, and also around the confluence of the Awamoko and the Waitaki, there's a big chunk there of that sort of circular area that's been chopped out.
I'm happy to move from the chair that we accept these changes as part of the ongoing process and adaptation that is taking place with the Runaka. Does anyone share my view?
Mr. Chair, sorry, I don't mean to be provocative, but I would probably prefer to approve the maps page by page, because be perfectly happy to approve some entirely as they are presented to us. But in a couple of instances, I would at least like some clarification from our planners before approving. And I would cite, for the sake of argument, pages 5, 7 and 8 as 3 that, and possibly 9 as well. But I would cite those as areas where I would like additional information from officers first.
Mr Campbell?
The sites in particular, councillor Hopkins referred to, without having iwi input, but on page 5, the area just east of Amarama had a significant sort of Maori occupation. I think it was Waitaha involved there. So it has a significance in particular the area around Amarama. So that's why it's to quite a large extent, not just because of occupation, but the resource that was in the river. The area confluence of Aomoka and Waitiki River was also a power site and a river crossing site, so it has perhaps more significance. And there's also an urupā there, I believe. And likewise at the Waitiki River mouth, there's an urupā on the south side as well that is very small, but the Sasam is a little bit larger to just cover the wider extent of that. So that those sites in particular do tend to have a bit more association with previous Maori occupation or burials, sites, that type of thing. From my knowledge, but iwi could probably provide a better understanding of that.
Mayor Kircher?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm actually happy to support your motion as far as accepting what changes have been made, but I would then go further and look to ask for more engagement around the idea of 2 schedules. One which would absolutely have the normal conditions and requirements on it around resource consenting, etc., because of the significance of those sites. But the other one being one that allowed all of Ngāi Tahu's cultural mapping to be shown, but wouldn't be sitting there with rules as such. I've come, as I mentioned before, I was heading off to meet with representatives from the Waiho Runanga, and I talked to them about it, and they don't want to see the areas not noted in the plan some way. They did say that they would, if something comes in, they actually look at the wider picture anyway when they look at implications of a resource consent. But I think if we're able to take at least some areas off the table as far as needing a resource consent to, as a starter, that would be helpful. It may be that they'll, if they're Okaha or the Runaka through Okaha were open to that sort of idea, and maybe the areas of most significance might be slightly larger, just to have a bit of a buffer, but they wouldn't be as large as what they are now. If we don't try, we won't get.
Councillor Blackler?
So just to understand, Mayor Kircher, what is the intent behind that? Basically to achieve recognition of historical ties to the landscape at a kind of lower threshold, and then anything that's there to physically preserve is in the higher threshold test.
Yep, bang on. Yeah.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, oddly enough, Mayor Kircher's suggestion echoes something that I will foreshadow that I'm going to move in a minute. But I do have a question with to the planners, if I may. Is it correct, it has been suggested to us that the Otago Regional Council is already using our Waihi Tupuna maps and is imposing certain restrictions and impacts on private landowners as a consequence of those impacts affecting irrigation, winter grazing, effluent consents and freshwater farms. And that whatever we include by way of mapping will impose strictures, not from us perhaps, but certainly from the ORC, which we may or may not be happy to have captured within our plan. Is that correct?
I'm not aware of RRC giving effect to our plan in reverse as we have to their policy, so that would be unusual from a practice point of view. They may have their own information from Reno across Otago around the.
The question, what's been suggested is that they're relying on our maps as currently published to, as the basis upon which they identify areas where their rules will apply. So in the same way that we use their flood area mapping to incorporate in our plan, they clearly have chosen to rely on our draft Waihi Tupuna mapping to include provisions in theirs.
Yeah, so I'll get to that answer, just giving the background. So they don't have to give effect to our plan. We don't have an operative plan with these maps in it, so I don't know how they could consider them. As I said, they may have their own maps or layers that inform regional consents or applications. Until it is a proposed plan, then they don't have any legal effect or weighting. So I'm not sure how they'd be accessing these or how they'd be in a statutory sense using them, because they're not a part of a proposed or operative plan.
The one question I'd like to ask of staff is the rationale. I know other territorial authorities have closed files in dealing with some of these land issues. We seem to have been everything's open. So the rationale given for large areas is to protect the integrity of a specific site. Did we examine the benefits of being able to engage with the landowners and share those specifics within a locked file that would reduce the need for the large mapping overlays?
I'm not aware that Ngāi Tahu suggested that type of approach. That would have been for them to come up with that approach in terms of mapping or how they do it. So you're right, the silent files would disclose a particular location within a wider area that's mapped. For instance, there's possibly areas there that they haven't mapped for that very reason as well. So they could be in addition to this, but not even mapped.
Councillor Hopkins.
Mr. Chair, I know that when Ōkaha first came to us with the proposed sites and areas of significance to Maori, they drew attention to the fact that they were looking for the maps to include Waihi Tupuna rather than Waihi Tapu. And certainly it was the case previously that plans generally focused on the latter, and often employed silent files to maintain secrecy of sensitive sites or secret locations of sensitive sites. I am troubled. Mr. Campbell has basically said that the ORC can't impose rules until their plan becomes operative. That's fine. But if in the process of doing their plan and not consulting with us, they've relied on our mapping and simply imported it into their own document, then this will have impact on our ratepayers that we did not intend and did not impose. And so I'm halfway tempted to suggest to the mover and seconder of the recommendation in front of us that that recommendation be amended to say that these attached updated sites and areas of significance to Maori overlay mapping are accepted on the condition that all cultivated land or land containing any other elements required to modify, and I want to use the wording from this morning, to modify for agricultural or industrial use, and all land zoned for residential use be removed, currently shown in the SASM overlay maps in the draft district plan, are removed from that overlay and its boundaries further amended accordingly. I'm asking you if the two of you will consider that.
Through you, Mr Chair, I don't have a seconder recorded for your motion.
The mayor seconded the motion.
Thank you.
Just a reminder that these are only a subset of the SESMs that were in a schedule that's been recommended. So it's a modification of already listed and mapped SESMs. So it's not all of the SESMs, so that we're only talking about the ones on this agenda item. Yeah. So just a reminder, the motion is about these SESMs only, not the entire suite of them.
Yes, I understand that. I think members do as well. Well, speaking to the motion, I believe that we have to continue to show good faith with all the parties involved in this and acknowledge that resources are holding up some more potential reviews and that there can be more changes coming to this proposal and there's certainly the opportunity through a submission process to be even more specific. So whilst I have sympathy for your amendment, councillor, I prefer the motion as I've moved it. Mayor Kircher, have you anything to add to that or? All right, well, on that basis, I will test the meeting and put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye.
No.
Against?
No.
I declare the motion carried.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move two further motions if I may. The first is that all land currently zoned for residential use, that I'll start again, that all land zoned for residential use currently included in the SASM overlay maps in the draft district plan are removed from that overlay and its boundaries amended accordingly. And if there's a seconder, I'll speak to it.
Just before I look for a seconder, I wonder whether this is one of the items that would be better foreshadowed for our meeting on the 18th rather than dealt with today. I'm just opening it from that perspective, but.
Well, I'm happy for it to lie on the table, but I mean, there's clearly an issue on Cape Wonbrow that I think is unintended, and I think we can solve it simply by changing the boundary. But as long, if we agenda it for the 18th, that's fine.
Mr. Campbell?
Just to reiterate, the residential zone rules, in terms of the SESMs, that's very permissive. So the only time that someone would have to consult with iwi would be if they trigger the earthworks rule in the residential area. So it's very permissive in terms of that. So it doesn't really create a whole set of rules under the SASM for residential activities. Just if there's a trigger for an earthworks rule or subdivision, then that's when they'd be consulted. given a lot of it's developed anyway, I can't see there being too many issues from an iwi perspective. They've told us that informally, but the threshold is very low and of minimal impact. It's more an informative layer, but is really only triggered with that earthworks and subdivision, I think. Yeah. That's, yeah.
All right. We have a motion tabled by councillor Hopkins. Do we have a seconder? There being no seconder, I'll declare the motion lapsed.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move a third resolution, and this one relates to the matter that the mayor discussed earlier. And I'd be willing to accept, if there is a seconder, amendment not affecting the intent, but based on advice from officers. But the motion is as follows: that the proposed district plan includes as an overlay the previously published Ngāi Tahu cultural map to assist public understanding, and that any impacts on private land within that overlay are resolved on the basis of mutual consent between the parties rather than through employing a rule-based framework.
I sort of lost track halfway through.
Well, it's the second layer. Do you want? Do you want me to repeat it? Seriously? Okay. That the proposed district plan includes as an overlay the previously published Ngāi Tahu cultural map to enhance public understanding, and that any impacts on private land within that overlay are resolved by mutual agreement between the parties rather than through a rule-based framework.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there was some different wording in there as well, but I have written it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Campbell?
Yeah, just a couple of things. One is a question around, would it replace the current SASM maps and rule framework? And then secondly, obviously we need to go back to Ngāi Tahu and Mariki Runanga to gauge their view on the revised approach.
Well, sorry.
Mr. Chair, I was thinking of pro forma. I think it could be much simpler that we discuss with Okaha and through the various Runanga the possibility of having a second schedule of Ngāi Tahu cultural mapping that sits outside the rule framework. I mean, that's if Councillor Hopkins believes that's close enough, and if Mr. Campbell thinks that gives enough direction, we can go with his wording because it's already written down.
Look, yeah, fine. I drafted that resolution before you made the point about second schedule. And I think yes, I would agree with you. Your solution is simpler. So I'd be perfectly happy for that to become the resolution if you're willing to second it rather than just pro forma. But I think the point about it is that it implicitly assumes that there will be potentially a further contraction of the SASM boundaries where the rules do apply. Because as we have heard today, both the mover and seconder of the original resolution that's been carried signalled that they felt there was a need for further examination and possibly reduction of or modification of the boundaries. So this resolution, now you employing the mayor's wording, do you want to move and me second it or what? Okay, well, that resolution, I think, implicitly presumes there may be further reduction in the actual area where rules apply, i.e. the actual SASM.
Well, I wrote what you said, but it wasn't as a. I did write what you said. I think it could be much simpler. I think we should discuss with Kaha about having a second schedule of Ngāi Tahu cultural mapping that sits outside the rule framework. So if you want that then to become the motion, you just give me a minute, then I'll just get another motion box, and then when I can move it into a resolution state, and then you.
I'm more than happy to help, have the discussions at more the chair level, if that's helpful. If staff want to have the discussions at the Okaha level, just whatever works. Be good if we can get a pragmatic solution to the situation we're in.
Yes, we can certainly start that conversation. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, everyone understand where we are? We have the motion moved by the mayor, seconded by councillor Hopkins. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? The motion is carried, councillor Hopkins. I know it's getting later in the day, but please, let's try and retain a reasonable semblance of behaviour rather than slip into senility.
Do need to be in public excluded.
Yes. We need to move this along because we are calendared to go into public excluded. So we now return back to the current meeting and we open up the additional information. And that is, the first issue is dealing with a proposal for a change or amendment to ONL and RSL overlays in the information in front of you.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure who the reporting planner, I think it looks as though this might be Katrina. Katrina, can you, these maps are quite precise and very site specific. Can you just perhaps flesh this out a wee bit for us, please?
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Through the chair, in terms of the mapping, it relates specifically to an area in Omarama, the Red Flats area, which is on, I think, part of Killamont Station. And this came as a result of feedback from the landowner and landscape evidence received from the landowner, which was then reviewed by our landscape architect and agreed that there were certain areas that should be removed from the ONL.
Okay. Just one question, the red line and the small blue bit to the extreme left of the map, what do each of those denote, please?
Through the chair, the red line denotes, I think that's the state highway. And then the blue area is just, that's just a slight overlap in mapping. That's just a bit of an error that we've since corrected. It just shows where there's an accidental overlap between the rural scenic landscape overlay and the outstanding natural landscape overlay, which has since been removed.
Well, mindful of the fact, thank you for the explanation, Mr. Chair. Also,
Councillor Backler.
Thank you. I just wanted to understand, so the figure A is all one property in question, or the changes that have occurred are one property. And further to that, you spoke about a reduction in overall outstanding natural landscape, but there is an increase in ONL on the north side of the stream there. So what is the net change and what was the rationale for the addition of the ONL on the north side of the stream when the south side was taken out?
Yeah, I can cover that. So primarily this is to do with the Red Flats area, which is that piece in the middle, down by sort of Broken Hut Road, and then back out to the State Highway. So it's some sort of stripy looking paddocks. So they were wrapped up in the original ONL with the Ahuriri Flats. So that's chopped back to the edge of the Osler Fault. Across the river is subject to the other maps, so this item doesn't relate to land across the river. It's just to remove the ONL on those Red Flats area and tie it in with the Osler Fault boundary. So what was shown as rural scenic across the river has now been merged with that whole sort of series of low hills on the north side of the Ahuriri clay cliffs right through there. It's picked up, but that's subject to that whole landscape feature on the other side, which is not part of this consideration.
So supplementary, based on the motion that was passed this morning around ONL, and the fact that it incorporated both cultivated and modified in a partial context scenarios, this layer here now would revert back to rural scenic most likely.
Now the recommendation is to make the Red Flats area rural scenic and remove the ONL, but it doesn't. We haven't done the work to assess any other bits of land across the river, other than what's shown on the planning maps at the moment.
Sorry, councillor Percival first, councillor.
So on figure A, the increase of the ONL, all cultivated land, isn't it? Well, am I confused here? The increase from B to the top of the figure A. You with me? Is that not all cultivated land?
This item is only to seek changes to the Red Flats area. The land to the north is not part of this resolution. It's covered by the other mapping, so it can probably sit in that discussion of the mapping. There's at the very top of figure A, there's a little green blob comes in from the Quailburn area, which is rural scenic, so that can be covered in the other discussion on that mapping or the resolution from this morning. But the purpose of this report is to only seek approval to amend it, basically the south side of the state highway as it affects Red Flats.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, to advance things, I would like to move that the District Plan Review Subcommittee recommends that council receives updated mapping, and that's everything else in that first resolution or recommendation remains. And I would then move the second recommendation that the updated mapping received may remain as presented or be further amended as a result of other resolutions made by the subcommittee.
That's been seconded by councillor Blackler. Your response, Mr. Campbell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure that's needed because we're only talking about removing ONL from a specific area and it's defined as shown on the maps. The other resolution will stand on its own and we'd work through for other areas around there. So we're only seeking to change it for this specific area because of a landowner request in landscape reconsideration. And that's the resulting maps. It's that area south of the state highway that we're concerned about. Any other areas are subject to the other maps and all that resolution. We just want to keep it simple for this one if we can.
So what you're saying is the landowner wants that area in purple in the amended map just to remain in purple. So even if in general the resolution made this morning removed cultivated or modified land, in this instance, at the specific request of the landowner, it would remain as currently mapped. Is that what you're saying?
I think we need to forget that the land north of the Arthur River or Highway is part of this discussion. The only thing we have been asked to reconsider is that area south of the state highway that's known as Red Flats, the stripy paddocks, which the landscape architect has agreed to remove the ONL and just realign the boundary with the Osler Fault. Any land outside of that is subject to other mapping and considerations.
Steve, look, to advance things, I'd take Mr. Campbell's point. I'd still like the two resolutions to stand because, or recommendations to stand, because the second one only said may remain as permitted or be further amended. So it's very conditional. And rather than have a lengthy conversation here, it's no bad thing to just have it as an option or backup. And both have been seconded.
All right, we have moved and seconded. Does anyone else want to speak to the motion? All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. All right, well, for those of you watching online and members of the public who have been in attendance, we thank you for your diligence today. But we now have to move into public excluded. So the process there is thank you, Councillor Linwood, for moving. Seconded Mayor Kircher that we move into public excluded. Those members of the subcommittee in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried. Wait till we